Thank you again for joining us tonight. We are having an issue with our live streaming, but the meeting is being recorded. I'm getting a text from our tech guys. Okay, he said he'll post it for recording tonight. So this meeting will be posted for recording tonight. My name again is Tabitha Harkin. I'm the Community and Neighborhood Development Planner with the Town of Groton. And we are here tonight for the second of two meetings for the Affordable Housing Plan. And a little bit about the Affordable Housing Plan is state statute 80-3 or 8-30J requires that every municipality put together an affordable housing plan by 2022. They didn't give us any guidance really on what needs to go in that plan. So we hired RKG and Associates, a local firm, to work with us to evaluate the community's needs, give us a better sense of where the gaps might lie and who the community profile is. And that presentation was given at the first public meeting and is available on YouTube. And after we looked at all that, we were given a set of draft recommendations to mull over and to then roll into tonight's presentation. So at our first meeting, as I said, RKG presented a whole host of data. And then at this meeting, they will be giving you kind of a summary of that and then a set of recommendations. So thank you very much for your time tonight. I know everyone's really busy, so this is great that so many folks came out, and we will be having a question and answer session after the presentation so we can gather your information. So I'll hand it off to Eric Halverson from RKG and Associates.
Thanks, Tabitha. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to switch to share my screen for a second. So hopefully everybody can see the presentation. Is that coming up, Summer? Okay, great. So as Tabitha mentioned, for tonight's meeting, we have two primary goals. The first is to review some of the issue and opportunity areas with you that we've pulled out from our analysis of Groton's housing market. Much of it comes from that first presentation that Tabitha mentioned, which has been recently posted online. The second goal for tonight's meeting is to present a draft set of recommendations and strategies that can help the town address the housing goals for Groton's housing plan. So as Tabitha mentioned, my name is Eric Halverson. I'm a vice president and principal with RKG Associates. I manage our Boston, Massachusetts office and cover much of New England. RKG has been around for about 40 years, and we're a planning, economic development, and real estate consulting firm, and we work a lot with municipalities, regions, counties, and states on housing issues. And joining me tonight for the presentation is one of our project analysts, Summer Pan. She'll be going over the first half of the presentation, and I'll take over for the second half when it comes to talking about the strategies. So just really quickly for our timeline, we began in March, so we're on a pretty quick timeline, mostly to meet and get it in for the state's deadline. In March, we started with all the demographic and economic baseline information, learning more about the town, its household formation, and doing a little bit of analysis on housing supply and demand. Throughout the process, we've also been working with an advisory committee, which was established by the town of town staff and also folks and local stakeholders who are engaged in Groton and the region's housing market. We had a public meeting back in April, and then after April, we started working on the affordability analysis to better understand the potential gaps that might exist between the housing stock that's here in Groton today and what people can actually afford who live here today, or those who may want to live here in the future. And then we started working on recommendations. In May, we presented the draft set of recommendations to the advisory committee and then began to refine those based on their feedback. And then in June, here we are with public meeting number 2. About a week from now, next Friday, we're aiming to release the draft of the actual report, which will begin then a 45-day public review period of that draft report. So it'll be open and presentable online for commentary by anyone who wishes to submit comments on the plan. And then in July, we'll begin the adoption hearing process and then submitting the final plan, the final draft plan to the state for hopefully for their approval. So Summer's going to take it from here, cover the first half of the presentation, and then I'll be back for the second half. Summer.
Hi everyone, my name is Summer. I'm the analyst from RKG Associates. I will be walking you through the first half of the presentation today, which is again an analysis part. So the first issue area I want to discuss is the housing affordability gaps that exist within Groton's housing stock and market. Next slide, please. As you can see, within Groton, there are many different owners and renter households earning a variety of incomes, which allow them to afford either rental or ownership housing at very different price points. In 2019, the median sales price of a home in Groton was $255,000, and the median rent for a unit was just under $1,300 a month. According to housing income data for the town, about 38% of all households could not currently afford the median sales price or the rent of a unit if they were to spend no more than 30% of their household income on housing costs. To afford the median prices, a household would need to earn more than $50,000 to $60,000 per year, as you can see on the table on the right. Next slide, please. Although Groton currently exceeds the state's mandated 10% of year-round units as deed restricted affordable, meaning those units are restricted to individuals or families earning a certain income, about 2,200 of those units are for Navy service members and their families, but counted as income restricted units by the state's definition. If we were to remove those Navy units, as only access Navy units are available to the public, it drops Groton's affordable percentage to just under 11%. When we talked to the Groton Housing Authority, they indicated the average waitlist time to access an affordable unit is around 1 to 2 years, telling us there's more demand for affordable units in a city of town. Today, there are just under 4,800 households who earn at or below 50% of the area median income, which would qualify them for affordable housing. 40% of all renter households and 19% of all owner households fall within that income range, as you can see indicated by orange. And this map shows the location of the deed restricted affordable units across the town, with many concentrated on the city side and also in the Quantic Bridge area. Next slide. In order to identify housing gaps across different income ranges, we first compared the number of owner households by income to the number of owner units that will be affordable to those households. By subtracting the number of units from the households in each income bracket, we can better understand where more housing may be needed at each price point. So here, the supply, meaning the number of affordable units available compared to the demand, which is the number of households within each income bracket. And if the supply is more than the demand, then as you can see on the graph here, that number would be positive. If the supply is less than a demand, there would be a shortage of housing units, which is indicated by negative numbers on the chart here. For ownership households, there appears to be fewer units available to what upper income households could technically afford to pay. We know sales prices are on the rise and demand, particularly during the pandemic, has grown. The deficit of higher priced ownership housing may also be placing added pressure in the middle of the market, with higher income households buying down and coming with more down payment, better credit, and more competitive offers. This could potentially be making it harder for lower and middle income households to purchase homes. Next slide, please.
Hey, Summer, can you hold the microphone a little bit closer to your mouth? It's just a little hard. Okay, great, thanks.
So here we are looking at the rental side of the demand equation, and it looks a little bit different. There again is demand at the upper end, with higher income households being able to rent units at higher prices. This again could be placing pressure on the middle of the market and creating demand for more rental units. But we also see a pretty significant deficit for households at or below 30% of your median income, which is that thick blue bar on the left, indicating our lowest income renter households. This is very typical in most communities, as these units need to be heavily subsidized, often provided by housing authorities or municipal programs. But this also stresses the need for more affordable housing, as these households are likely renting units at prices higher than what they could afford. Next slide, please. And the second issue here we will explore today is around accommodating future protected growth in Groton. The town has several housing developments, both permitted yet not fully complete, and future potential developments that have not yet been permitted and are under consideration. The town has approved around 274 housing units for construction, of which 189 are in structures containing 3 more units. There are also an estimate of 1,048 units that's under consideration by the town across various projects that could help address housing gaps, particularly on the rental housing side. As we discussed the last time, rental households are growing, as are the share of smaller households that could benefit from studios, 1 and 2 bedroom units. Next slide, please. To estimate future housing demand in Groton, RKG ran our housing demand model, which takes into account several factors for estimating future demand. It utilizes population projections to the year 2030, employment projections, estimates of known housing developments, the number of households that move in and out of Groton each year, occupancy and vacancy factors, and an estimate of the number of households that choose to move to a new unit in a given year versus an existing unit. These 6 factors then provide us with an estimate of housing demand by owner and renter and by income over the next 10 years. Our projections estimate future demand for 212 ownership units and between 1,016 and 1,143 rental units by 2030. Next slide, please. From the housing demand model, we estimated about 66% of new units will be occupied by 1 and 2 person households, with another 28% coming from 3 and 4 person households. As was noted in prior presentations, Groton's household size is shrinking, and most new household formations are from single person households, driven by both older and younger residents. The projections also estimate 56% of unit demand will come from households earning less than 80% of AMI, or $63,000 per year. Units affordable to these households will be priced around $230,000 for a for-sale unit and $1,600 a month for a rental unit. About 21% of demand will be coming from the highest income earners in Groton, those over 120% of BMI. And the final issue area is around housing rehab needs. As part of the study, the town requested RKG to conduct an estimate of housing rehab needs and costs to help understand dollar amounts that may be needed to keep housing habitable and in good condition. To do this, RKG looked at homes or structures that had an estimate, an assessed value of 25% of the town's average assessed value, which equates to about $71,000 in value. After looking across all residential structures, we identified about 29 properties that met this criterion. The town estimates an average rehab request under their current program is around $30,000. So if all 29 identified properties did require rehab funding at the full amount, that could mean about $870,000 is needed to address deficiencies. This is just an estimate, but does provide an order of magnitude estimate for the town to consider as it thinks about how to prioritize or fund the rehab program. Next slide, please. So this map shows the location of these structures, 29 structures identified, and most of them fall into the Midway Oval and Paquona Bridge areas of the town. There are a few to the north and to the west as well. And these rehab needs also align with the data from census around the percentages of units that have different physical condition issues like the lack of plumbing, kitchens, or phone services. The highest percentage are in the same Paquona Bridge area, as you can see with the darkest shaded color. Around 5 to 10% of the units there have physical condition problems. And now I'm going to turn it over to Eric to talk about goals and strategies.
Great. Thanks so much, Summer. So from the data, we'll move on to talking about the plans, housing goals, as well as the strategies. So these housing goals that are on the screen were presented at the last public meeting, and they were also refined through your input at that meeting, a public survey that went out, which we received feedback through, and feedback from the Housing Plans Advisory Committee as well. The plan will focus around 5 goals, which include Groton's housing stock will help to support Groton's population and employment base. Groton's neighborhoods will provide for a diversity of housing types. Groton will preserve and maintain both deed restricted as well as naturally occurring affordable housing, housing that is affordable but doesn't necessarily have a deed restriction to it. Groton will work to increase its supply of affordable housing over time, and Groton will provide adequate housing technical assistance to owner and renter households. So for this presentation and also for the plan as well, the actual document, we will organize the strategies underneath each goal to create clear ties in how a strategy or maybe a set of strategies will allow the town to make progress toward those goals over time. The first set of strategies are around encouraging housing production to accommodate future growth, and also look at ways to partner with employers potentially to help address some of the housing issues. So for the first one, Groton recently updated their zoning ordinance and includes actually a lot of progressive regulations to encourage housing and mixed-use development in different locations, mostly where existing development as well as existing infrastructure are in place to support that future development or redevelopment. However, there are some small changes or additions that we're suggesting which could help enable additional housing development. The first is to consider adding a new residential category in the use table in the R7 and or the R12 zoning district that would allow buildings with say 3 to 4 units or perhaps more with specific conditions attached. This would provide different housing types in already built up areas of town that might have appeal to say young professionals, young families, or maybe even downsizing seniors who are trying to get out of a larger single family home and into a smaller unit. The town might also consider adding an open space subdivision district that would allow smaller lot sizes and homes on a parcel of land that's in the say 5 to 10 acre range, where today in the zoning, it is a 20 acre minimum parcel size. So our thought process was this might allow for some strategic infill sites to become available for maybe the clustering of houses or smaller homes, maybe more affordable than the larger homes found in many single family residential districts today. The town may also want to consider the ability to allow mobile home parks to add additional units, which is not currently allowed today. Of course, if land is available and standards can be met. And the town may also wish to consider allowing new mobile home parks in locations with existing utilities and those that would meet some specific design guidelines or conditions, also something that's not currently allowed today. Lastly, and we'll talk more about these later in the presentation, the town might consider some small changes to the existing accessory dwelling unit regulations, and also maybe some ways to encourage senior housing as well as accessible units. The town has and continues to pursue strategies of leveraging town-owned land and or town-owned buildings for future development. As this process unfolds in the future, the town could look at ways of using town-owned land to address housing gaps, both in the total number of units, but also by affordability. As part of the land disposition process, the town could look at encouraging or maybe even requiring a set aside of future housing units to be affordable to different income levels. This could be one way of potentially leveraging an existing town resource to address future housing needs.
Eric, I want to just stop you there. We've had a question from the audience about what AMI stands for. And as we know, that's area medium income, but maybe you can give a little bit of a primer on that.
Yeah, sorry, great question. And didn't catch that, so I appreciate it. Yeah, so AMI is just an abbreviation. I apologize for not spelling that out, for area median income. So those are income thresholds that are set by the federal government and then the states for different regions or even communities around the United States. And the area median income thresholds are usually by a percentage of the median income. So it usually goes 30% and below of area median income, 50% and below, 80% and below, 100%, 120%, and so on. And typically, deed-restricted affordable housing and affordable housing programs, both at the federal, state, and often the local level, are usually tied to specific area median incomes. Often 80% of area median income and below is typically what could be considered sort of middle and lower income households. Okay, great. Hopefully that answers that question. So just moving on to an additional strategy. So we also know that Groton and also really the larger region continues to attract growth in companies and employment, but those employees we know need housing. And they're also potentially looking for housing in the location with convenient access to where they work. Communities around the country with large employers have engaged in partnerships oftentimes whereby the employer encourages employees to live in the community where they work. And they do that in certain ways by providing housing assistance, like they might provide down payment assistance for an ownership unit. They might provide rental subsidies to the employee for a rental unit, or even partnering with a community, a nonprofit organization, or even a developer in some instances to help construct housing that might not be there in the community to help meet the needs of growing employment base. So given Groton's large existing employment base, as well as the growth that's under consideration and happening across the region and in the town, this could be a potential strategy to consider going forward. Lastly, under this goal, the town does a great job of marketing economic development and workforce initiatives, to the outside world, to the broader market. As a part of that marketing campaign, the town could also potentially integrate housing as a key marketing tool, particularly any affordable housing or workforce housing initiatives. Employers and employees are considering the affordability of the housing stock more and more when they're determining where to locate. So the town could then market these housing programs, housing affordability, and any future housing developments as part of their ongoing marketing efforts. The next few strategies will attempt to help address the goal around diversifying housing types in Groton. So the first strategy here is encouraging what's known most commonly now as missing middle housing. This honestly was a housing typology that was built pretty commonly many decades ago. Your 2- and 3-family homes where multi-generational families might reside, or opportunities for workers to live closer to factories or mills. This housing type has really fallen from our vernacular for one reason or another, but many communities are starting now again to look at ways of bringing that back through zoning. This strategy in particular looks at integrating different building types with multiple units in the R7 or the R12 districts, but would also probably want to come with some design guidelines or maybe pre-approved designs that could be more quickly approved, and also ensuring that the new structures fit in with the surrounding neighborhood. This would add new housing types that are not as prevalent in Groton, maybe for younger professionals, maybe small families, and again, maybe trying to address some of that downsizing and growing senior population. The second strategy is around accessory dwelling units. If you're not familiar with accessory dwelling units, or their abbreviation ADU, they offer a really unique opportunity to provide smaller housing options on existing parcels by creating either standalone or, in some cases, attached accessory dwelling units to a primary residential structure, most often in a residential zoning district. ADUs can offer affordable housing options for smaller households, provide seniors with a housing option or the ability to remain with their family, provide a starter unit for younger residents, and also offer a faster way to boost local housing production. So the town of Groton actually currently allows these to be constructed, and to date, several have been constructed. The town zoning already utilizes a lot of best practices around ADUs, which is great. But the uptake of ADUs has been a little bit slower than maybe what the town might have anticipated when they crafted the ADU bylaws. To address this, we suggest that the town look at allowing ADU structures to encroach into maybe a percentage of the rear setback of a lot where they are allowed today in the R zoning district. So right now, the entirety of the building envelope, the ADU building envelope, must be out of the setback. And that we think could potentially be limiting the building envelope on many parcels that could potentially actually support an ADU. We're also recommending the town explore some small incentive programs to both raise the awareness of the ADU program, as well as offer some potential financial relief to those property owners who might actually wish to construct an ADU. This could include an approach where maybe the town works with local banks and lenders around creating a low or maybe even a no interest rate loan program. If, say, an ADU is rented to a household at maybe 60% or 80% of the area median income. So trying to restrict that ADU to actually address affordable housing. The town might also consider connecting homeowners with an architect or a free design consultation, or even reducing or waiving certain permit or inspection fees for ADUs specifically. I apologize, I'm a little bit sick and my voice is going in and out. Lastly, with the growing senior population in Groton and the desires by many to actually remain in the community over time, Groton could also consider exploring options for allowing things like co-housing in the zoning. This is a newer form of housing which relies on shared amenity space, shared indoor and outdoor space, and also a shared governance structure similar to a co-op. The town could also consider requiring universal design features and ADA compliant units as part of new multifamily construction. This would help ensure that some of the units in a new building are accessible to those with disabilities. From a development standpoint, the town could also consider lowering the minimum lot size threshold for senior development specifically, which is currently set at a 10-acre minimum. Smaller infill lots around the town might be appropriate for maybe smaller patio homes or maybe even single level living, but don't necessarily meet the 10-acre minimum threshold for that the senior development parcel size needs to meet today. This could potentially open up some additional options for providing senior-centric housing. Lastly, the town could consider maybe continuing its partnerships with the Housing Authority, as well as other organizations who provide deeply subsidized senior affordable housing. As the senior population continues to grow and more seniors become or on a fixed income, the need for deeply affordable units may actually increase over time. The next set of strategies looks at addressing the preservation and maintenance of the town's existing affordable housing stock. So the first strategy here is around housing rehab and making sure the current program that's in place today can continue or maybe even be bolstered with additional funding over time. The town could consider loaning funds to owner-occupied households that are between 80% and 120% of the area median income, but in those cases, maybe charge a higher interest rate or have a faster repayment period compared to households that are at or below the 80% of AMI. The same could be done for investor-owned housing, where units are rented to households above 80% of AMI. We might consider requiring a higher interest repayment compared to those renters who are at or below 80% of AMI. To add protections for the few mobile home parks that exist in Groton today, the town could consider providing support to tenants if a mobile home park is discontinued from use, or even explore a policy where existing tenants get a right of first refusal and could potentially organize together and purchase the park themselves. The town could also consider specific outreach to park tenants with regard to housing rehab programs and maybe assist them with unit upkeep, which in many cases can actually be a primary cause of eviction in a mobile home park. There are also strategies to help ensure new development or investment does not necessarily lead to the displacement of existing residents, which include things like providing new affordable housing units as part of new market rate housing development. And we'll explore this concept a little bit further in a minute, as well as working closely with nonprofits or maybe equity-minded developers, or maybe the town purchasing affordable units through a future housing trust fund, another concept we'll explore. Lastly, the town could consider using funding from a future housing trust fund to provide a rental assistance program, and we'll maybe work with the Housing Authority on promoting the existing tenant voucher programs or maybe any new rental assistance programs that may come down the line. So the next set of strategies are targeted at increasing the supply of affordable housing. So the first strategy is around the creation of what's known as an inclusionary zoning policy, which essentially would mandate through zoning that a percentage of affordable units be provided as part of new residential development, or even maybe a change in use from some other use to residential in an existing building. So typically most communities set the percentage requirement at about 10% of the total number of units that are being proposed as a set aside for affordable, but this percentage can vary by market. The policies usually require units that are affordable to households at or below 80% of AMI, but in some instances you could go lower or you could go higher depending on what the town's goals are. The policy typically applies to larger developments, usually developments that are over 10 units or more in size, but that threshold could be set lower if in Groton, for example, more smaller scale developments are prevalent in the community. My guess based on what's coming through the pipeline or what has been approved over the last couple of years, you probably want to go with the higher threshold rather than the lower. Lastly, there are often provisions for what we call payments in lieu of units, which can apply if, say, a fraction of a unit is required. So for example, if you require 10% of all units as affordable, and when you multiply the total number of units by 10%, you're left with a fraction of a unit. So like half a unit or 3/4 of a unit. Instead of rounding that unit up or down, sometimes communities might prefer to have a payment in lieu for that unit so that they can put that money into a housing trust fund, which can often have more flexibility to address housing needs. Those funds could then be earmarked for that housing trust fund to then help build up a balance over time of the funds in that, of the balance of funds in the housing trust. So speaking of the housing trust, we would also recommend that the town create a housing trust fund, especially if inclusionary zoning is implemented. The housing trust fund can provide flexible funds that can be used to address a pretty wide range of housing needs. They can also be coupled with state or federal funds that the town might get from year to year. Some uses for housing trust funds might include a rental assistance program, maybe gap financing for building or constructing affordable units, maybe a way to help capitalize or grow the rehab program, maybe a housing weatherization program that could help address energy efficiency, maybe funding for a down payment assistance program for owner-occupied units, or even foreclosure prevention. Lastly, the town should continue to look for ways to partner with nonprofits and organizations like the Housing Authority, the Always Home program, or Habitat for Humanity to work on housing production, housing preservation, homelessness prevention, as well as maybe neighborhood revitalization and stabilization efforts over time. The final set of strategies are around the provision of adequate housing technical assistance to owner and renter households. So with the rapid rise in home sale prices that we talked about in the first public meeting here in Groton, we think it's becoming more difficult for first-time home buyers to actually enter the home ownership market. A down payment assistance program can help address one of the gaps that many home buyers face, which is the ability to get together the required down payment for a home. Typically, a program like this might target homeowners at certain income levels to provide that assistance, especially if federal funding program is utilized. There's going to be income thresholds that are applied, whether you're using community development block grant funds or home funds for the program. Those are usually restricted to households maybe at or below 80% of AMI. The town could do the down payment program in a number of different ways. They could administer it in a number of different ways. One would be providing a lump sum payment in the form of a grant. This is sometimes favorable because it avoids long-term tracking of that payment, as well as long-term administrative costs of monitoring that payment and the repayment of that over time. You could also consider forgivable loans. Those are also common. So forgivable loans are often loans that are given out and then forgiven to the homeowner if they reside in that unit for a certain period of time. So you might set that at, if you stay in that house for 5 years, for 7 years, for 10 years, then that loan will be forgiven. Some communities also offer 0% or a very low interest rate loan, which might require repayment over time. Oftentimes that repayment comes if the person sells the home, or if they refinance the home, they would be required to repay that down payment assistance amount. This approach could actually help recapitalize the fund over time and actually grow the fund and make more loans available over time. But the downside to that is it does require consistent and long-term administrative support. The two final strategies include housing education and resources that could be provided to both tenants and landlords, offering things like legal advice, information on support organizations that might be available if issues occur, tenant laws and protections, fair housing materials, and information on housing assistance programs. Lastly, the town could consider relief for senior households from property taxes through programs like tax relief or maybe a senior tax work-off program where seniors could volunteer hours each year at town events, maybe facilities or doing jobs to lower their property taxes each year. This could be a way to help keep property taxes lower or more manageable for those seniors who may be on a fixed income or may be coming into a situation where they're on a fixed income over time. So that was the end of the data as well as the strategy portion. So I'm just going to take a quick water break for a second and open it up to questions. We've thrown just 3 of them up on the screen, mostly around the recommendations, which is what we're really interested in hearing your feedback. Did any of the recommendations particularly resonate with you? Are there any recommendations you would not be supportive of? And are there recommendations maybe that we missed that you would like to see added as we put together the draft affordable housing plan for public review?
So please use the raise hand function in the bar to raise your hand if you'd like to speak. Everyone's shy tonight.
Should I stop sharing the screen tab of those, or should I just keep it up?
We have a question from Suzanne Roy, so I'm allowing her to talk. Suzanne?
Yes.
Go
Can
ahead.
You hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I just want to thank you, first of all. There are some recommendations that really resonate with me. The inclusionary zoning, middle housing with guidelines, accessory dwelling units, senior housing and senior tax relief for work off. All of these really sound wonderful options. So thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any comments or questions? Looks like I have another. Sean Powers. Oh, sorry, I muted you again. Go ahead and unmute.
Thank you very much. The presentation, Eric, was very well done, and we do appreciate all the hard work that you put in towards doing this. I think when we look at senior housing and things like that, some of these will work if we can find the right properties to develop and the right developers to do the work. I definitely like some of the first-time home buyer stuff. I think we need to get maybe the banks involved, local banks and local lenders. And I do know that New London has a program with the city of New London for renovating houses and things. So a lot of good stuff in this report that you're putting out. And thank you very much.
Thanks for coming, Sean. Any other? Oh, Robert Capolini, hold on. Okay, Robert.
Hi, this is Rob Capoletti. I appreciate your work that did a nice job putting together the presentation, some very good recommendations. We do have some concerns. I work at the Housing Authority, obviously. I do have some concerns about the increase of mobile home parks. We get a lot of complaints from residents at mobile homes where I'm assuming a lot of the mobile homes there were older because they have huge utility bills, high repairs, which often make what at one point was affordable housing for them no longer affordable because they're putting a lot of what we would use as out-of-pocket cash into utility bills, repairs, maintenance, winter months trying to keep warmer, trying to protect their properties from failing conditions because of the weather. Instead, what we would like to see are developments that are still as dense as a mobile home park would be, but they'd be more of a permanent home, maybe using some passive house energy designs where you see sustainable energy, geothermal, solar, other types of developments used that will help people on a fixed income, low income, or people downsizing into like a village setting where there's community space that people could use together, as well as using some of their pocket money to live a little better instead of paying utility bills. So I mentioned one of the things I thought of as you're talking about the increase of mobile homes, creating more village-like developments in place of a mobile home type of park, and maybe some incentives for mobile home park owners to convert those to permanent housing where residents would have the right of first refusal and maybe create a nicer tax base where people were investing in their communities instead of in mobile homes. That was just one of the thoughts I had.
Thanks, Rob. That was great. Good suggestion.
Thank you.
All right, we have Bruce Jones.
Great, thank you, Tabitha. This is a very informative, and I want to go back and watch the first presentation. I didn't get to see, haven't seen that, so I want to take that and match it up. I just had two comments that might help. One was when we were moving through the financial stuff at the beginning, it moved very quick, and just maybe just a little more explanation in the report, just what that means, and the income levels that people have. And then you moved into different sort of types of housing, and I'd love to see some examples of what you were talking about. As we got to the end of the report, you had some examples of different kinds of housing in the proposals, but I'd like to sort of just see some examples that were in the report of where in Groton those kinds of properties existed, just so we could go, oh, I see what they're talking about. There's this kind, there's that kind. So it just has a visual that went with the sort of the analysis of the housing stock that's existing. So it just, because the report moves quick, you just don't want to have some chance to go back and look at it, but just having some better examples of what you were meaning by these different kinds of properties. So, but other than that, I think the report was great, and the recommendations are excellent, a lot to think on and to think about, but it's mostly just having a little clearer examples of things.
Thanks, Bruce. Yeah, it's a great comment. When the actual report is released for the public comment, there'll definitely be a lot more detailed write-up about each of the data points and all the analysis as well as the strategies. For the presentation tonight, we tried to keep it to the sort of bullet points, but that'll all definitely be in there. And if it's not, please let us know.
Okay, good, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruce. Any other questions from the group? Rob, I think we have Paige Bronk. Who's that? Go
Can
ahead.
you hear me?
Yep.
Actually, it's a question for you, Tabitha. To Bruce's point, there's all this data and people need to digest it, but they're trying to relate to Groton and what they know in terms of existing housing, what they know the demands are, and specific to housing rehabilitation of existing housing. RKG made some assumptions, which I think are fair, regarding how many structures might be in need for rehab. But Tabitha, could you make a general comment about what you've experienced regarding Groton's small housing rehab program that we have today?
I mean, just as an overview, yes, we do have a housing rehab program today. It's funded through CDBG, so there's federal restrictions on how we process each application. So generally, like RKG said, we do give out $30,000 loans, which are paid off at the time of sale or transfer. The waiting list for our housing rehab program right now, I think I have about 5 cases waiting that I'd have to review each. When they come through, I have to review each case again to make sure they meet the income limit and all the other qualifications for the CDBG program. So it does tend to go slower than I think we would prefer it did. I did get a request the other day, so occasionally folks come in looking for help, but because of the parameters of the program, it's somewhat limited, and we tend to have a waiting list because of the process. Is that what you were looking for?
Yes, thank you, Tabitha.
Thanks, Paige. So we have another question in the question and answer box that says, Tom Bradham said, what role, if any, do you see the growth of unregulated short-term rental properties in Groton limiting long-term affordable housing, particularly in the ADU market?
It's a great question. I'm just taking a minute to gather my response.
Don't answer that question.
What was that? Sorry. Oh. I think in terms of the ADU market, I mean, our idea, and I think the town's hope, is that those would be long-term rental and not necessarily used. I'm just going to make the assumption that by unregulated short-term rental, if they're referring to like Airbnb or VRBO as an example. There are provisions or policies that the town could put in place. It's something we could consider as a strategy to address short-term rentals. There's the sort of Airbnb policies that many communities, particularly waterfront communities or vacation home communities, will use, and that could apply to the ADU market. So you could put restrictions around, how long the lease term has to be on an ADU, or even on an actual rental unit that's out on the market that's not an ADU. So if that's something that the town was interested in, that's something that we could look into, and something we actually have looked into for communities. Actually, one in particular down in South Carolina that we worked on about 2 years ago had asked us to look into that. So if we didn't hear that as a big issue when we did some of our stakeholder interviews, but that could just be something that just wasn't mentioned or asked about, and we could have missed it. So I'd be interested to know if this from Tom or from others, if this is an issue that we should be paying particular attention to, and something that we might want to think about adding.
Thanks, Eric. Hope that answers Tom's question. Do we have any other questions from the audience? I'm not seeing any hands. So I'll just reiterate that this is going to be posted. It is now streaming. We did get the streaming figured out. So it will be posted on YouTube and available, and we'll be sending that information out. Like Eric mentioned, the draft report still will be submitted to the town, and there'll be public process to review that. The PDF, right? Bruce Jones just asked, when is the PDF going to be available? And I think we're aiming for the end of the month. We need to get it to the state by the end of the month. So that's the goal. And did I get another question? Nope, that was it. If anyone has any questions, concerns, comments, always feel free to contact me, T. Harkin, Tharkin, at groton-ct.gov. And if there aren't any other questions, I think we can probably adjourn.